Please be seated. This week was a week of a lot of firsts in a long while for our family. For one thing, last Friday, our high school daughter Ilana was finally able to make it to Israel to participate in the Tichon Ramah Yerushalayim study abroad program after the program was delayed several times since late January on account of Israel and, of course, Ben Gurion Airport, by extension, being locked down for COVID. She and we were thrilled that everything worked out in the end after the long wait. And the good news is, we're not even hearing from her the last few days before Shabbat because she's so busy and having a wonderful time. So that's an even more wonderful thing. On the local Dallas front, since we recently achieved fully vaccinated status, Jen and Jonah and I went with the Rothman Wallet clan to the Orioles-Rangers game last Sunday. Note how I led with the Orioles there, even though the Rangers did end up winning 1-0 in 10 innings. It was great to be outside at a baseball game again and see the new stadium, which is beautiful and intimate as far as baseball stadiums go, that is. This week, I also had my first lunch with someone inside a restaurant in more than 13 months. And it was the first week I've physically been in the office each day since the pandemic started and we began locking down. Things just felt a little different. Certainly not normal, but edging back that way, perhaps. Part of what felt invigorating about this week was that sense of difference. After more than 13 months of being in the same routine at home day after day, waking up, working, or Zooming on my laptop in the computer room, taking walks with Jen, eating meals and watching streamed or DVR'd shows or movies with my family, they were all wonderful times, but truly, the hours and days blurred together after a time. Zooming in for services on Shabbat only increased that sense of erasing the distinction between days because even Shabbat had Zoom like every other day. There was no distinction between work and home, virtually no distinction between one segment of the day or day of the week and any other. Of course, in Judaism, the very basic essence of Shabbat is making one day different than the rest to break up the routine. Shabbat is not designed to be like the other days. When we conclude Shabbat and we recite the blessings of Havdalah, we say, Hamavdil ben Kodesh lachol, ben Or lachoshech, ben Yisrael la'amim, ben Yom hashvi'i l'sheshet yemei ha'maaseh, Baruch atah Hashem, Hamavdil ben Kodesh lachol. Praised is God who distinguishes between Kodesh, the sacred, and Chol, the ordinary, between light and darkness, between Israel and the other nations of the world, between the seventh day and the 6 days of creating. Shabbat is a separate day, a day apart. It is unique and holy when the days of the week are the days of creation and creating, or less glamorously and unofficially referred to as the days of the grind. And this brings me to the second of our two parshiot for the Shabbat Kedoshim. The very first sentiment expressed in the parsha is Kedoshim tiyu, ki kadosh ani Adonai Elohechem. You shall be holy, for I, the Lord your God, am holy. Since holiness itself is a hard word to define, especially when it is used to describe God who is essentially indescribable, the rabbinic sages of long ago considered in the Midrash the possibility that Kedusha actually meant separateness. You shall be separate and distinct, for I, the Lord your God, am separate and distinct. In fact, immediately after this instruction to be Kedoshim, like God is Kadosh, our parasha jumps into 3 actions that we are instructed to take, which might advance this definition of holy as separate. Revering our parents, because there is no other relationship quite comparable to the parent-child bond, or perhaps the divine parent-to-human-child bond. Keeping Shabbat, and avoiding worshiping idols like others around the Israelites were constantly doing. Were we to stop there with the teachings of our parasha, it could perhaps have felt satisfying to accept this particular rabbinic interpretation of holiness, that distinction, differentiation, and separateness is the key to holy and elevated living. On the face of it, it seems to make sense, or at least some sense, for Surely it's difficult for our souls to feel energized and uplifted, surrounded by monotony and repetition, as been the pattern for the last 13 months of our lives. But the Parsha's teachings about holy behavior then proceed to take a different turn. We're told to leave the corners of our field for the needy, not to lie or steal, to pay wages promptly, to deal honestly in business, to refrain from talking negatively about others, to judge rich and poor alike, to look out for the stranger, and to love, as I mentioned earlier, to love your neighbor or fellow as yourself. None of these expressions of holy behavior are about being separate or distinct. Quite the opposite. They're all steps we're supposed to take or refrain from taking in the course of our daily lives and interactions with other people. Holiness in this sense isn't lived out by turning one's back on society and the world, by separating from everything going on around us. It's achieved amidst the world, a part of life, rather than something set apart from life. Rabbi Sidney Greenberg of blessed memory once shared a joke that an employer said to a prospective employee, "I see you have references from 3 ministers. We don't work here on Sundays. Do you have a reference from someone who sees you on weekdays?" Yes, Shabbat is uplifting and refreshing, inspiring, different and holy, but it's also not the only time we're expected to be the best versions of ourselves. Because how can we really see if we're being our best selves when we're only lifting ourselves up when we're largely detached from the world around us? Rabbi Greenberg paired the aforementioned joke with a teaching from Professor Solomon Schechter of blessed memory, who asked, somewhat rhetorically, where are the saints in Judaism? Before answering, Jewish saints do not form a sect apart. You find them in the very midst of community. They are not raised on a special pedestal because a man who works as a doctor can be a saint. A man who works as a laborer can be a saint. Holy people may be walking in God's footsteps, but when they're doing so, they're walking in the midst of other people. We need both the Kedusha of Shabbat and the Kedusha of the everyday to fully experience what it means to be holy like God is holy. Whether we're living through a pandemic or hopefully soon looking back on its aftermath, we need separation and an island of sacred time to which we can escape once a week and for all intents and purposes leave the world behind, so that every day we'll not run together and we won't run the risk of losing ourselves or our focus without that precious weekly opportunity to reboot. And during the rest of the week, we also need to infuse our choices during each of the minutes and hours and days, regular as those moments may feel, with the weight of the opportunity and responsibility to be present in our community and our world and to connect with other people meaningfully. In a now effectively retired High Holiday Machzor, the Machzor Chadash, we find a moving summary of this beautiful balancing act of holiness, separate and amidst. There is holiness when we strive to be true to the best we know. There is holiness when we are kind to someone who cannot possibly be of service to us. There is holiness when we promote family harmony. There is holiness when we forget what divides us and remember what unites us. There is holiness when we are willing to be laughed at for what we believe in. There is holiness when we love truly, honestly, and unselfishly. There is holiness when we remember the lonely and bring cheer into a dark corner. There is holiness when we share our bread, our ideas, our enthusiasms. There is holiness when we gather to pray to God who gave us the power to pray. Kedoshin to you, Ki kadosh ani Adonai Elohechem, you shall be holy, for I, the Lord your God, am holy, both separate and amidst. Shabbat shalom. Bruchim to you. We turn back now to our Siddurim to page 184, where we'll continue with the Chatzi Kaddish introduced